practice can take place. Because I think a lot of people assume, they say national security law, oh, isn't that like courts martial and stuff like that? And that is an element of it, but there's much more to it. And so we have a number of we have some really fantastic people here, and I think you're going to enjoy them. I'm going to do pretty brief intros. If you go on the website for the conference, you can read their full bios because it's very impressive. But if I went through their bios, we'd be at 1:30 just on that because they have really esteemed careers. First, I'd like to introduce Admiral Melissa Bert. Admiral Bert is the Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Coast Guard. That means she is the highest ranking lawyer in the Coast Guard, and she is in charge of the entire Coast Guard legal community. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about her, but what's interesting about the Coast Guard, and it's reflected in her assignments, is unlike the other services, if you're a Coast Guard lawyer, you might rotate into operational assignments. In other words, directing Coast Guard operations, sailing ships, and doing that sort of thing. Admiral, are you a qualified ship sailor?
I spent 2 tours at sea, so.
Yeah, so.
Not anymore, though.
Yeah, somehow I'm still an active member of the bar, but don't put me in a courtroom. But what's interesting about her is that, and you really do need to read through her bio, she went to the Coast Guard Academy, and she went to GW Law School. She's a National Security Fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School. She's on the Council on Foreign Relations. She's been an adjunct professor at George Washington University and University of Miami Law. And she also was, we shared an award. Did you know that?
It's so exciting.
Yeah, it's the Judge Advocates Association Outstanding Career Armed Services Attorney. Unfortunately, we're about 20 years apart, so it's not quite as exciting for me as it may be for her. Next, we have my great friend, Phil Carter. He's at Salesforce at the moment, and he has a really interesting background, very diverse. He was in the Army for 9 years. He had a combat deployment to Iraq where he served as an advisor to the Iraqi police, and they didn't kill him, obviously. That was actually a real issue.
They tried.
We're a little bit joking about it now, but that was actually a real issue. And he was also Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Detainee Policy several years ago, a job that really was an extremely, say, controversial one, then and now, I would say. He ran a research program at RAND Corporation. He was researcher at CNAS, Center for New American Security, where we were both associated. He was on the Biden-Harris transition team. He was an advisor to the VA, and I think he has, and was in private practice too for a period. So his JD is from UCLA, and he got his BA from the University of California, from UCLA. So he's a Trojan all the way. The next in line here is I don't think I want to say old friend. I think
that's accurate.
Okay, I'll go with it. I'm good with it, but Michele Pearce. And Michele, you really do need to look at her bio. It is really unbelievable. She's done everything in the national security field. She was in the Air Force, which is where we first met. She worked on Capitol Hill for Senator. Was it Senator?
Senator Susan Collins.
Yeah, Susan Collins. She worked. She became the Army's acting general counsel. She has done so many different jobs on Capitol Hill as well, and also in the Pentagon. She was in DoD legal for a while, and currently she's of counsel at Covington. So she'll be able to give us a wide perspective of what those different national security law practices. And are really super happy to see Genelle Francis here. Tell us where you're originally from, because my wife and I love this place.
St. Croix, Virgin Islands.
Yeah. If you've never been there, you need to go there, because the people are like super friendly.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, then there's the weather and everything else. But she's the unit chief of the cyber.
A counterintelligence law unit.
Yeah. But what's really interesting about her, and that's great, but what I found really interesting, she was legal counsel to the FISA court,
Yep.
which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And that is a very interesting and challenging job. And I'm sure she'll tell us everything about it. No, actually, she won't tell us anything about it. Because if there's a secret assignment, if there's a classified position, that's probably pretty close to the top. She's done a number of different jobs in the intelligence community. In 2010, she was a member of a team that won the award for the best intelligence group.
And yes, the Intelligence Community Legal Team of the Year.
Yeah, which is really impressive. She went to Howard University where she got her law degree. And so I'm really super happy that she was able to fit this into her schedule. And she tells me that she's going to be around for the conference, for the rest of the conference, isn't leaving until Saturday morning. What? Don't want to rush back to DC? Maybe you could get back by Friday and get into the office for 15 minutes. No.
There's an office down the street.
She's already been there.
I've already been there.
Well, there you have it. And she'd tell us exactly where it was, but then she'd have to kill us all. So this is really a fantastic panel. I'm so glad that they were making time to share their backgrounds and their thoughts. So what I thought I would do to start out, I have some really great student-generated questions for them. But let's start out by, if you could maybe each tell us a little bit about your personal path towards the position that you're in, and what are the kind of national security related things that you do? And Admiral, if you could start off.
Well, let's see. I was in a family where my father was a lawyer, so you would think, oh, that's why I went into the law. But actually, he was a civil rights lawyer and had not a lot of national security experience. But I went to the Coast Guard Academy. It was, at the time, I went there because it had a really pretty sailboat on the front of the catalog, because they used to have catalogs back then. And then I had never been.
Do you guys understand what a catalog is?
Yeah.
Paper thing, anyway.
The marketing materials, yeah. So I was like, wow, look at this. And there was a beautiful cadet girl on there who I thought maybe I'd look like her if I went to the academy. But it looked really fun, and it was not, but it looked really fun. And it was, free. So my father was happy about that. But I did not at that time think I was going to be a lawyer. I just thought I want to have an adventure. I want to live in different places. I want to try some new things. And the Coast Guard did then a little less law enforcement, but a lot of the protection of the marine environment and search and rescue and a lot of things that I just thought were really cool. So I went to the academy where I took 99% engineering classes, because apparently that's really important to the Coast Guard, is to have good naval engineers. So I was not a good naval engineer, but I did take a lot of those classes. And then I went to sea, and I served aboard 2 ships, which was really fun, but I knew I wasn't going to do that forever. And that's when I ended up going to law school. So pretty distance from when I was in college. I didn't really know what I was going to do in the Coast Guard, but I knew that the Coast Guard had a million different things, like, because I was involved in operations, and I always thought, well, we talk to lawyers about a lot of things, migration, law enforcement, now we're doing, balloons and Elon Musk's space issues. But we were, from that time even, which was many years ago, we were sort of involved in a lot. So I thought it would be good. And sure enough, as a lieutenant, I was assigned to Miami, which is really where I wanted to go because all the drugs and thugs are Miami, and I love law enforcement. So, but I reported at the time of a mass migration, which you all may have been aware in the 90s. There was a huge migration of Cuban and Haitians into the country, and so all of a sudden I'm a lieutenant, and we're trying to come up with ideas about how we're going to stem this, and also stem a lot of Cubans were going to pick up people and bring them back, and it was chaos. Like you could look at the beach and there was just utter chaos. So, so as a lieutenant, I was already involved in an executive order to stop. Basically, it was an executive order to say that we're in a national crisis with Cuba, and we did regulations. I also got involved with drug prosecutions, international jurisdiction, new technologies, because the Coast Guard came up with some ideas about how to better do these cases, military justice, basically you name it. It was really exciting, and I was only a lieutenant, so I thought, oh, what the heck? So that's really my story of what I have done. I look forward to answering your questions about what it's like to kind of go back and forth, because I've also been an operational commander and done other things along the way. So, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited for you guys. I brought along Peyton Coleman, who graduated from the law school here in 2021, and I've set a goal for her to recruit at least 24 of you guys, so we'll see how that goes. But you can ask her if she's having a good time out of my sight. So.
And what's interesting about that, and Peyton, I'll let you correct me on this. You probably don't want to, but she's somebody who did not necessarily think that she was going to wind up in the Coast Guard when she came here to law school. And I think that's typical of most people who end up going generally into the national security field, but specifically into the military. So, and I think the internship was a really decisive factor for it. Phil?
I can't top Admiral Bert, but I did also fall for a recruiting poster. In the 90s, I wanted to be all I could be like a lot of other people, so I joined the Army, paid for college, and then went in the Army after that. But it was a little boring in the late 90s, and so I thought, I'm going to get out, go to law school, do something different, and then 9/11 happens when I'm a 1L at UCLA. Kept me in the reserves, and I'd been an NP. I decided to become a civil affairs officer, did that for a while, saw all my friends going to Iraq, eventually went as well. But it helped me choose what kind of law I wanted to practice, because I was looking at law firms and I thought, I could do tech, I could do M&A, what about government contracts? That's a neat way that I can sort of keep a foot in the national security space, keep a foot in the private sector space, and serve a client base that is trying to improve national security as well. So I did that. And then over the years, I've sort of kept a through line through a bunch of different jobs, focused on the sort of intersection of the private and public sector. And what I do now is help a big tech company that is a commercial company sell to the public sector and navigate all sorts of interesting rules the government puts in place when you hold sensitive data, or you have to have a facility clearance to do classified work, or you have to navigate certain rules as you sell to both the U.S. government and foreign governments and so forth. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a totally unpredictable and unplannable ride, but it's been fun.
Yeah, I think one thing that Phil said is it's not always intuitive to people that even if you're a tech firm and not what people would think of as a defense firm, you're going to get into matters which have a national security dimension. And non-compliance can be very unforgiving. And I also think in terms of government contracting, if there's an area that is full employment, you'll never be looking for a job if you're into, especially if you're in defense, the defense part of government contracting, which is its own unique. People like me would say nightmare, other people would say opportunity. Speaking of that, Michele.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my story, and I'll start with where I'm at and then just tell you how I got here. So I do work on government contracts at Covington. My practice, I'm co-chair of our public policy group. So I have an opportunity on any daily basis to work on drafting legislation that we're going to go to Congress on with respect to either a regulation or a law that we are experiencing or our clients are experiencing challenges with respect to either implementation or execution. For example, today, before coming here, I've been working with clients on supply chain security. My career has always been in national security, both in the Air Force as a judge advocate. General Dunlap was my boss when I was in 04.
And
I
she
could tell you a lot of
succeeded,
stories about
despite that.
And despite that, I am here today. Actually, General Dunlap is a patriot, and I learned so much from General Dunlap when I was a young
Okay, let's
major.
correct the record here. The one thing that really annoyed me about Michele is that we would go head-to-head with things, and then over time, it would be proven that she was right and I was wrong. And I'm really
always
not
right,
joking about.
General D. So I do work on a number of, on any given day, just in my view, really interesting, challenging national security matters in the M&A world, in the CFIUS practice that we have at Covington, which is, I think, worldly known for the quality of the work that we do and the number of clients that we work with. In a very niche kind of practice, which you probably have some familiarity with, I assume. But so I work on lots of different things on a daily basis in that regard, but all focused on national security related questions and government contracts and the DFARS and those types of questions. Just guiding clients through either, the regulatory landscape or, again, going to the Hill and educating or advocating for different positions to clarify what the rules say, because this might be shocking to you, but Congress doesn't always write clear laws. And so it's partly my job to help clients sort those problems out. So I kind of think of myself as a problem solver. I was always a problem solver, I felt like, when I was in uniform, and I'm a problem solver today, but in a different context and making a lot more money. I probably have the strangest path to my career as it currently exists than most people. I grew up in a military family. My dad was a submariner during the Cold War. Didn't have any lawyers in my family. In fact, I'm the first person to finish college, first person to certainly go to graduate school. Never imagined I would have an opportunity to work on the matters that I've been able to work on, to work with the quality of people who've served. And now I find myself at Covington and Burling, which I feel very fortunate to be in the position that I'm at. Covington, and I think Hensey's coming from the firm.
Right.
So if anybody knows Hensey, I don't know if he graduated maybe too long ago for this class to know them.
There are people here who know him because he's come back for the Black Law Students Association.
Okay, so he can tell you what Covington's really like. But from my perspective, he's an associate. I feel really fortunate to be at a big law firm that does work in the most, very sensitive national security areas, but in addition to that, we work with major multinational corporations, so we've got offices all over the world. But it's really the quality of the people at Covington that is really remarkable, and I've found a lot of very much, whether it's synergies or just kind of the culture is very much at Covington like it was in the military, so that's about my
We're
background.
very lucky to have you. I mean, when you look at her resume and the things that she's done, it's really quite amazing. Plus, raising a family and all the.
Oh, this is my daughter, Kate. She's going to be applying to Duke Law School.
Yeah, did you hear that, guys? She's thinking about Duke Law School. So, try to clean yourself up. Genelle.
So I just completely fell into the national security field. Like Michele, I was the first one to go to college, no lawyers in my family. So I just knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to Howard, and I just knew I just had to keep my grades up because I wanted options, right? So if you have good grades, no one will argue with that. You can pivot to whatever direction you end up heading into. So after law school, I clerked a year. I did a little bit of everything because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I also went straight through, so unlike my colleagues, I just, straight through college law school, so no prior experience. I really was figuring it out. I clerked right after law school. I then worked at a law firm. I did the summer associate my 2L year when I was in law school, and then I deferred a year so I can clerk, and then I ended up at the firm. Did that for a number of years. I was doing financial services. I saw a job announcement on USA Jobs for DOJ National Security Division, and I was like, this seems a bit more interesting than, crunching numbers and doing contracts. So I just figured I'll apply and see what happens. I was at a law firm in New York at the time. And I got the interview. And then I'm probably thinking what you guys are thinking, like, how do I sell this? Like, I have no national security background. I'm glad I got the interview. It's my job to lose at this point. I just need to get there and sell my transferable skills. Which I did. I played up my law firm experience. You get a lot of different types of experience at the firm, which we can talk about later, that translates over to the national security world. So I just talked about what I can do. I talked about being a quick study, provided some examples. They bought my story, and I got the job offer, and so that's how I entered into the national security world. National Security Division, DOJ gave me my start. I started in counterterrorism, which frightened me. I was 20-something. I was terrified of making a wrong decision. I remember an FBI agent yelling at me, telling me that thousands of people are going to die because of what I'm saying, and he hopes I can sleep at night. And I remember these conversations. To try to browbeat me into something. But I started counterterrorism, did that for about 5 years, and then I wanted to try something different. I realized my colleagues who were doing counterintelligence were working not as hard, and not quite worried about, someone blowing themselves up or anything like that. So I said, well, let me try the counterintelligence unit at DOJ. So I did that. I enjoyed it. It worked out really well. And I'm like, you guys have been doing this whole time. It's very interesting work. As you can imagine, just your run-of-the-mill espionage matters and cases.
Oh, yes, the run-of-the-mill espionage. I see them all the time.
I know. So eventually, I became a manager in the counterintelligence unit there at DOJ. And the FISA court recruited me over. The presiding judge at the time asked me if I would consider being a legal advisor to the court. There are 7 legal advisors to the FISA court. So I figured, okay, I think we all know that when a judge asks you to do something, you don't say no. Although I love DOJ, I figured this would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I took the job. It was fantastic. Happy to talk about what I can about that a little later, too, if you have any questions. And then FBI recruited me after that. So my only time really doing a cold application was with USA Jobs. And I think once I got into the circuit, it really is about relationships. And I tell law students all the time, it starts really here at law school. You build relationships with your colleagues now because you just never know where you're going to end up. I still have people calling me from law school that I remember sitting in class with. Your reputation is everything. So I just wanted to make sure I press upon you that now is really where you should start having integrity in everything you do, because it really does follow you, for the rest of your legal career. So I digress. FBI recruited me, came on over to FBI. I stuck with counterintelligence at the FISA court. I ended up doing a little bit of everything because that's what we do. I got back into counterterrorism, cyber, and counterintelligence, but I reverted back to CI work when I came back to FBI. That was my only ask from them, that I just want to be back in CI, and they put me there. So now I run one of the counterintelligence units at the National Security and Cyber Law Branch, continuing to do run-of-the-mill espionage matters. I was joking with my colleagues earlier that if you saw that show, The Recruit, on Netflix, it's a little bit out there, but it is kind of similar. Like we are fielding questions from agents and analysts every day. It's a very dynamic job, and it is. I guess I can talk about it more. I don't want to take up too much more time talking about background, but But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to tell you about my typical day, if anyone's interested.
And fortunately, she is going to be around for the entire conference. In the work you did, you obviously need a security clearance, and I think everybody here has gone through the security clearance process. And even in private firms, security clearances are. Can you tell us a little bit about what is a security clearance? How hard is it?
So you are, in the national security world, you are entrusted with the nation's secrets. So we need to make sure that we check your background, check for vulnerabilities. We ask you, I think it goes back about 10 years, 10 years of going back into the past, just everything, just all the questions you can imagine.
And depending on the clearance, right? Because if it's a poly.
Yes, there are different levels. Yes, exactly. If I'm talking about like a TS clearance, the highest clearance, yeah, we definitely dig into it, but there are lower levels. There's a secret level, and there's a public trust level, which is lower.
Tell us about your polygraph exam.
Oh, at FBI requires a poly, and I think some other agencies
lifestyle,
do.
yeah.
Yes, DOJ did not require a poly, so that was definitely a change. And my agents have told me many, many times how unhappy they are. The DOJ attorneys are not polyed, and they don't trust them with their cases. So I wear my therapist hat, which is also part of the job, and I talk them through why it's okay. But yeah, no, the poly is it's something.
I call it the most unpleasant experience.
It is pretty unpleasant, but you do it once. It's hard for lawyers typically because we don't live in yes or no, and the answers have to be yes or no. So you get asked a question, and then you are sitting there thinking, but what about that time? Does that count? You can't say it depends. And while you're thinking about it and mulling things over, you're failing. I don't have like any type of hard research, but I've been told that lawyers have like a 50% pass rate. Yeah, it could go either way because we overthink. It's like, what about that? What about that? What about that? What about that? And you can't ask follow-up questions. So the poly is required to work at the Bureau and with certain other intelligence community agencies. But security clearance in general, you answer the questions, you be truthful, do not lie. And if someone from FBI, we do our own background check, so you'll have an agent going, just kind of asking questions, going into your background, interviewing people, talking to your neighbors, talking to former employers. We look into finances. We just want to make sure that it can be done. When you think about it, you think of how many people work in the national security field. It's a good bit. How many people have a clearance? It's a good bit. So it's not impossible. Just be truthful. And I think that answers your question.
It was a little disturbing. I had to take a CI, the easy one, the CI poly. I was at Stratcom. And the 4-star general, I told him, hey, I passed my poly. And he acted too surprised. That was a little trouble. And then and in the run-up, how you have to give the names of all your friends. I got a call from a friend from a long time ago. He says, hey, Dunlap, some guy with a badge was coming around asking questions about you. We didn't tell him nothing. We told him we didn't know. We didn't even know who you were, which is kind of the wrong answer.
Yes, it is. And the funny thing about that is, I grew up on an island, so they went to my high school. Just remember when I started at DOJ, I was fairly young, so 10 years back took me to, 17, 16. And my high school called my parents. And they said, is Genelle okay? Someone's here asking questions. What's going on? Because, the island's small, so the entire island found out. It's like a small town. So that was pretty funny.
But thanks to COVID now, a lot of these investigators have gotten really lazy and they just call.
They do.
So it's like people call you and say, hey, do you know this person? And it's a lot different than when they show up at your door. And so now's a good time to apply for a clearance.
My neighbors love this.
And the polygraph is not quite the nightmare because, the polygraphers are kind of motivated for you to pass because if you don't, then there's only two answers. A, you're a spy or something, and they do an investigation, they don't find anything. That means either the polygrapher doesn't know what he's doing or the polygraph is witchcraft. Neither one, none of those, solutions. Let's, Admiral Bert, you do a lot of hiring, in essence, of lawyers. What kind of traits do you look for?
So we like Peyton, and it's sort of a different, I feel, I'm a Coast Guard officer first, which is a different way to sort of talk about things. Yes, I'm a lawyer, but leadership is really very important in the service. Whether you're leading a team of attorneys and mentoring and working with people, it's a very team environment. So we like people who want to work together and don't have really sharp elbows. And we like people who are interested in doing a lot of different things because, whether you went to school, I went to law school and I took the classes that I thought were going to be on the bar exam, which was really a waste, but it doesn't really matter what you're doing in law school. It matters that you want to have a life and a practice that you enjoy. And in the Coast Guard, you can come in and practice law in many different areas. You can be a prosecutor or a defense counsel. You can work in, a number of things, whether it's the environment or law enforcement or national security. We now have we have a growing program, adding attorneys every day to our intelligence law and our cyber law offices, and we send people to Georgetown Law and to Yale for national security LLMs, and it's been so that's a burgeoning area, but you can choose your path in the service. I chose a path that was both operations and law because that's what interested me, but I have colleagues who went from legal job to legal job, or maybe they worked on the Hill or did some other things, but you can choose your path, and I like dabbling in things. So I guess I'm someone who I would not ask to do your will or something when I retire, but I actually want to be an agent when I retire. I don't know. Do you guys take FBI agents at an advanced age?
Waiver.
I like it. But yeah.
It really hurts
The
when
waivers
she
go
thinks
through you.
she's at an advanced age. Phil, you've kind of done everything. How would you compare these different venues or circumstances that you've practiced some kind of national security law?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I wrote in my notes, it's really context dependent, having hired people for in-house roles, government roles, think tank roles, and law firm roles. Each you're looking for sort of a different combination of skill sets. There are some commonalities. I think, like the service, team players are really highly prized, people with really good problem-solving skills. One of the things I always look for is someone who's taken some risk in their career. So you can fill a desk drawer in Washington with someone who's got all the pedigree in the world, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, whatever. Duke. Exactly. But that tells me you're good at test taking and you've got a great grade. Like, that doesn't tell me everything. But if you've taken an additional step, if you've launched a business, if you've taken some risk and written a lot of articles, if you've taken some, sort of risk and taken on something, that tells me a lot about character. And then I also look for people that have, grappled with some amount of adversity, and maybe it's because of my background. I look for the people that worked while they were in school or that did some other things while they're coming up through, whether it's serving in the military or it's teaching or it's something else. I think that broadens people as they move up. But success looks different in each context. In in-house practice, we have an 80-20 rule, which means we never aim for perfect work product. We always aim for a B because there's not enough time to ever get to the level of a litigation filing. Whereas in my law firm practice, we aimed for a 99% work product. I even got sent back one time because a law partner wanted me to print the filing on bond paper. Mind you, we were PDFing this filing, but he wanted the filing to be so perfect that when it was PDF'd, it looked like it had printed on bond paper and his wet signature would look a certain way. I mean, that sort of perfection is insane, in my opinion, as an in-house lawyer. But in a law firm context, you're getting that perfect filing and that perfect work product. So it's a different set of skills, and I think you look for different things based on where you're hiring and where you're applying.
Michele, it's kind of the same question to you. You've been in these different circumstances. How does the practice of law national security related look in those different contexts to you?
So, I mean, do you mean in terms of the type of work or in the hiring context? Like,
Well-
what am I looking for in traits of a person who I would be wanting to
Correct.
serve?
Let's go with that.
So I think for me, and I've hired people when I was a staff lead on Capitol Hill, when I was the general counsel, I actually established a program to reach out to HBCUs, and Howard was, of course, at the top of our list. And for me, I'm always looking for the person who arrives at my desk with a passion for what our mission is. And if I sense that the person has arrived at my office and is unfamiliar with what I do, or is just apparently checking a box to get somewhere, and this is just one, milestone or one, objective, and that they're already thinking about where this potential opportunity could lead, that is the person I don't want to hire. And I think that it, for me, is about teamwork also, where, I don't want to hear necessarily about you in the interview. I actually want to hear about you and the teams that you've supported and the work that you've done to support, whether it's your most immediate team and the people in our law firm who work in, the M&A practice, for example. What are you contributing to the M&A practice? What are you contributing to, the summer associate program and all of the other various activities, whether it's in the law school context, how active are you, what kinds of, different outside of the classroom activities, are you passionate about? So in my view, I want the person who's really focused on the here and now, who's focused on, the job at hand, and the person who really cares so much about the mission that they are going to work hard, be dedicated to the team, and, obviously be there to learn, and for me to, of course, help them grow to whatever that next kind of position is or whatever that next milestone is. But you've got to be focused on the here and now, and, focused on really just giving everything you can to your team and to your boss. I think particularly in a big law firm when you're a summer associate or you're an associate first year, second year, whatever.
What do you look for in a new lawyer?
So everything that everyone just said is actually very important. I want to highlight for everyone that the one thing no one said was that you had to have national security experience to work in the national security field. That is not a deal breaker. I know that's a myth. I just want to make sure I put that out there. We are looking for certain things that make you who you are, to show that you would be a team player. It's just kind of just basic things, and making sure that the way you present yourself in your cover letter has to be pristine. We get a lot of applicants, especially for the honors attorney program. I sit on the panel for that, and we got, I think, about 400 applicants for about 10 slots. So you've just got to make sure that you present yourself in a way that stands out. But we are definitely not looking for prior national security experience. So I just want to make sure I put that out there.
Are there some other myths about the practicing national security law that you all want to dispel? This is an opportunity to do it.
You don't have to have a clearance to apply for the Bureau specifically. I am in the National Security and Cyber Law branch, but a lot of people believe that to work at FBI, you have to be a national security lawyer, and that is not true. We are kind of like a mini law firm. We have multiple areas of law that we practice. We have privacy and civil liberties, we have a litigation branch. Civil litigation, fiscal and contract law, forensic sciences law unit. So we do a lot of different types of law. So if you are not sure of the area of law that you want to be in, maybe it's national security one day, maybe it's something else. FBI is a great place, or any other really government agency. They all have an Office of General Counsel that practices many different types of law. So that's a myth I wanted to dispel for the Bureau in general.
I was just thinking about what you were saying. I think most of the government is that way. The intelligence community is very curious to me, because obviously we're part of that. The Coast Guard is a member of the IC as well as FBI. And I guess it's always surprising how all these things aren't worked out. So, for instance, this, we can't call it a balloon anymore, high altitude,
High altitude.
whatever, the balloon. You know, you would think that we all had all of that planned, but, and that there's a response. But, you know, when you're, so even in the Coast Guard, you know, I think, oh, the Coast Guard, why are we involved in this? We're on calls with the National Security Council. We work very closely with the National Security Council on a number of things, which is something I did not anticipate. And in fact, they're pushing through some things that we're doing that a younger one of our folks came up with that is going to be a game changer in national security. So it's very exciting to me to be a part of that. But it's not like every problem solved. And it wasn't as though we got on these top secret calls and everybody said, oh, yeah, this happens and this happens and this happens. It was Air Force, obviously, NORAD Northcom, which is Canada's airspace as well. They had some ideas. There were ideas about what the capabilities were, what the repercussions would be, you know, what, and for us, a lot of it is jurisdiction. So where would we have authority to either retrieve debris or stop things or things like that? So I guess it's not, a lot of it is solving problems, as you said, and figuring out the best approach. It's not always just, I think sometimes people think of the law as you're going to interpret something for leadership, but very often, at least at a senior level, you're actually coming up with ideas. So you're kind of taking off your legal hat, but you're using your legal experience to say, you know, this is high risk, this is low risk, this might work. And I think probably that's why I liked being in the Coast Guard, because I was very familiar with a lot of the things that we're doing, because if you're doing it and then you're providing legal advice on it, you're really well integrated with the planning.
I would add as well, and this is the argument I make to my class on corporate national security law, that national security law reflects the American way of war, which is to leverage the private sector greatly. So we don't, you know, the government doesn't build stuff. The government doesn't do everything. The government relies on the private sector, whether it's developing things to shoot down high-altitude latex devices or it's coming up with the next AI and machine learning tool that will defeat China or Russia on the next battlefield in the future. And, you know, there are lots of areas of law that go into that beyond knowing public international law and detainee things and the things that we conventionally think about as national security law. So IP law, patent lawyers who help protect the intellectual property of the next great invention are going to be crucial in this space. Environmental lawyers, in all contexts, thinking about where soldiers can shoot, to what we can do with our allies to train and what we can do in terms of the South China Sea. I mean, there are lots of areas, and within every OGC, right, there's labor and employment, there's contract and fiscal, there are all these things that matter greatly, because if you don't have the right workforce of the Bureau, you don't have a Bureau. Right. And so the work streams that are available in national security law are just, you know, endless. And it's in a lot of ways, I think, what you see at a firm too, where it's about the kind of law you practice, but it's also about who your clients are. And NatSec is neat because you can sort of matrix those two and do lots of different functional areas of law for national security clients. And it's just endlessly rich as an opportunity.
I actually have another question, but let's open it up. Does anybody have a question in the audience that they'd like to pose to the panel before I?
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. My name's Katie. I'm at 12. I had a question specifically for Genelle. I'm kind of on the fence about clerking. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your experience and how that affected the rest of your career.
The year I clerked was the best year of my life. It was my intro into legal work, right? I worked with a judge, and it's like a mentorship situation. I think it was nice to bridge the gap between law school and actually practicing law. You learn so much from a judge, and then you get to sit in the courtroom and see different styles, right? Different ways people argue. You see different writing styles as well. You can get a judge's opinion about what's crap and what's not. you can get into the inner workings of how a judge thinks, and that's especially if you want to do any type of trial work. I decided to clerk because my 1L year, I had to do that oral argument court thing that you do as a 1L. It was a complete disaster. And I think it was then that I'm like, I don't think I'm cut out for this trial work thing. But I didn't want to just give up on it, so I figured I'll try to clerk a year, give it a shot. No, it absolutely did not. At that point, I knew I wanted to do transactional work. But that's how I ended up clerking. It was really just kind of weighing all my options and trying to figure out which direction I wanted to go in. I absolutely recommend clerking if you can do it. And if you are thinking about maybe going to a firm, you defer a year, or you could defer for the amount of time that you're clerking, and the firms usually love when you clerk. Right?
Yes.
I'm telling no lies.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's not something it's not an either or, it's in addition to, if you want to, you join the firm, you'll join the firm as a 2L or whatever, and not a 2L, second year associate, or third year, depending on how long your clerkship is. So you do get that time served. As a law clerk. So I recommend it. I would not change a thing.
But you don't necessarily have to clerk to have success.
True.
I think somebody here might not have clerked like me.
Yeah,
I wasn't
no, I
smart enough, actually.
I was much more mediocre, so you can still be in the Coast Guard and not have been a scholar, but you all are probably scholars or you wouldn't be here.
I think it's kind of, if somebody has a question, just raise their hand, but otherwise, I was going to ask, it seems to me, and one of the things I preach, but I need to test it against you as practitioners, it seems to me that in the national security area, it's particularly important to understand the client's business. Because people working in that space, and Genelle, what you said, I think resonated with all of us about how we're stopping the defense of the United States because of something we're saying. I think I've always thought it's very important to understand the client's business, because they will turn you off in a heartbeat if they don't think. But what's been your experience? Especially, Admiral Bert, as you've been on both sides of it, as a customer, as a client, and
I wholeheartedly agree. Some of the things we're talking about now are defense of ports and port infrastructure, shipping, and sometimes we have attorneys from other parts of the government who've never even been to a port, never been to a ship. They have no concept of what it is like to work in those commercial environments, or understand anything about it, and it's critical. One of the reasons why we like having people do both aspects, and I will tell you, in the Coast Guard, the one area that seems to be growing are the lawyers, because everybody wants a lawyer now. That was not always the case, but lawyers are so integrated in what's going on and tend to go back and forth that it's really it's been a growing business. And right now, for instance, we have one of our senior cybersecurity, national security attorneys. She's actually running a cyber office, not a legal office. She went from doing advising on cyber as a lawyer to now running an office, so she can go back and forth. And that's a great feeling, because you can lead in an area, and then when you leave that area, you're very trusted, because people know that you have credibility. So I would say, even if you're not going to do a career where you jump around back and forth, when people say, you want to come out with me to this or that, like I did a police ride along just because I thought, that sounds really fun. Take advantage of every opportunity you have to go see what your clients are doing, because it's fun, and it's helps your practice, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, everything is sort of a mixed question of fact and law, to use the sort of court vernacular. And I'm thinking about vignettes. I did a bid protest once involving gun turrets on a Humvee, and I had to know sort of what are the functional requirements for that, and it sort of helped to really understand that from a nuts and bolts perspective, as well as a prior user perspective. But more recently, got into a accreditation issue for a cybersecurity program, and it really mattered that I understood what encryption meant for both data at rest and data in transit. And the question really turned on how these rules applied to that factual scenario. And if you don't know that, you can't really be effective, let alone have credibility with your clients, let alone develop trust. I mean, I think to Genelle's point about being a counselor, a huge part of our role is being that counselor without a couch. We're really there to listen to them and help them solve problems.
Yeah, I would say the last couple of years I was in the military, when I was called in by a senior person, I would say it was a real legal question, maybe 40 or 50% of the time. Most of the time, they're trying to tap into the unusual way lawyers think about problems, because you tend to analyze them. Criminal law breaks down into elements in that way. Michele, actually, I have two questions for you. One, how do your clients do they kind of test you to see if you really know what you're talking about? And how do you deal with that? And secondly, you've had so many different jobs. Let's talk a little bit about the work-life balance. I mean, you've raised a lovely family. And,
Okay, well, let me start with my clients. So, clients, particularly who are GCs of a multinational corporation, or, we also represent many organizations and other entities. They're very sophisticated, of course. I mean, they pay a lot of money to get legal advice from our team. But what I think is the more interesting kind of dynamic of providing legal advice to many of these clients is they walk into a room assuming that their version of the facts is correct, their understanding of the technology is correct. And oftentimes what we're doing is
Stress
testing what they're saying. In addition to that, analyzing through the legal lens, what even the smartest GCs believe to be the facts. So our job is really to test what the client is asserting to make sure that we can provide our best legal advice, of course. And just one example of that is we work for a major telecom client who we were talking about the supply chain security issues, the most recent series of legislative policies and regulations that now very carefully scrutinize any item in the defense supply chain. And so if you're talking about, for example, a semiconductor chip, and your client, presents you with a fact pattern and you're scratching your head and you don't understand what the technology is and what exactly that semiconductor chip does in terms of receiving signals or sending signals. One of the things that I think that our team does really well is we ask really hard questions of all of our clients to make sure that, again, we understand the fact that they understand that as they are presenting the facts, they could be misunderstanding what the either technology is doing as compared to what they should be doing, or alternatively, they just don't have a wholesome understanding of the risks associated with their technology. So then turning to the more personal question, I think I've never had work-life balance, and just candidly, I've always taken big risks in my career. And, working on Capitol Hill, you're, for example, an at-will employee. There are no unions on Capitol Hill. You have no right to be there if the person that you're working for decides one given day that it's time for you to, find employment elsewhere. But I was very fortunate that I married somebody who is an incredible father and an incredible husband. And while he also had very difficult jobs, he was an F-16 pilot in the United States Air Force. He now flies for FedEx. I think we together as a team managed it very well. But, we were both on active duty. I served in Iraq. He served 2 years in Korea. I mean, it's a blur when I think back on some occasions about how my kids grew up. I don't know, Kate, you might have some perspective on this. But I will say this. I mean, being a lawyer at, the highest levels, serving as a military department general counsel and now, a co-chair of the practice group at this firm, it just is what it is. I mean, lawyers work hard, and you're going to spend a lot of time in front of your computer. And I have said to many summer associates who are kind of vacillating between, a big law firm or maybe, another type of opportunity, the bottom line is you have to be willing to work hard. And it's at some point there are going to be sacrifices. And I think the one light at the end of the tunnel from my perspective is the summer associates and the new associates at my firm are really demanding post-COVID a lot of accommodations that would have been unheard of previously. And so I am a mentor to a number of associates who now have decreased their full-time equivalent hours. So maybe they go not necessarily part-time, but maybe a little over part-time. So they negotiate with the firm, you know, what their work schedule and hours are. And people at Covington are very respectful. So if you're a new mom or you're a new dad and you want to take paternity leave or maternity leave, no one is going to say one thing about it. In my capacity as a co-chair, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that your time is protected with your family during those time frames. But look, I mean, these are long hours. You know, I'm working on a Supreme Court amicus brief right now with our government contracts team, and it's 24/7 because there's a deadline, and you've got to make sure, to your point, that the brief is perfect. And I found it very challenging, frankly, and I think I missed out a lot on raising my kids. But I do think that ultimately my husband stepped in and we were a good partnership. But I think that it's changing. And for you guys, I tell all the associates, make your demands. And for the first time in our over 100-year history, we now have a telework policy. So Mondays and Fridays, we don't have to be in the office, which the older attorneys at the firm are still up in arms about, and they just can't even believe it. And then we were told on Fridays we could wear jeans, and the management committee is, you know, really like understanding of wearing sneakers on Fridays. I mean, it's a brave new world out there, and I think it's pretty awesome. Truly, it is. Make your demands. I mean, I'm retired from federal government. I mean, this job is. I'm going to do this job while it's fun and I'm enjoying it. But what I have loved about the job is seeing all the young people come in and say, you know, I want to be present for my kids, so I'm going to like decrease my full-time hours. And I want to work, you know, maybe 2 days a week, or I am absolutely not going to come into the office on my telework days because I want to be with my kids. I mean, that wouldn't have happened in the Air Force. I don't know how the military handles this now, but the kids these days
I think
are
it is
doing
much
great.
more generous.
I'll
but-
just say, don't do this during your interview. Demands are not to be made during the interview.
Fair.
Just
but-
clean that up just a little bit.
So I go to the office to get away from my family, but everybody's got a different.
You know,
Gosh.
that's interesting that you should
That is-
say that, because when you go to the deployed areas, there's a couple people out there who are there who volunteer
Yes.
because, well, any last minute questions? I hope you take away from this wonderful presentation, I think some of our speakers are going to be able to hang around, at least two things. One is the diversity of the practice. I mean, whatever is a legal matter that you could find anywhere in the world, it's now migrating into has a national security dimension. I mean, you know, the defense budget alone is $850 billion. So you're not going to have too many clients, no matter what your practice is, that don't interface. And, you know, the Coast Guard's in Homeland Security, and Homeland Security is penetrating everything. You know, even if they don't want to, they're held accountable for it. I think the other thing, and this really is a compliment to our people, I hope you perceive that if you're going to practice law in this area successfully, you have to have the personality that people are going to want to work with you. And you can see these are fun people to work with. I didn't always say that about Michele, but
I was my class social officer in ROTC.
you know, and because it really does matter. Because people are need to want to work with you. And the clients, I can say this about the military, if the clients don't like you or think you don't know their business, well, you're going to be very ineffective. And so there's lots of things you need to do to build that rapport, even though it may be government, even though it may be a big law firm. There's things that you need to do to understand their business and build a rapport before you're dealing with the crisis. Because once you're in the crisis, it's hard to build that kind of rapport, to get to the right end state for the nation, for the client, for everybody. But we're,
Just to piggyback off that, when you build a rapport, usually you hear about it before it becomes a crisis. If you don't have the rapport, that's when you hear about it, when they're calling you when something's already, when you're cleaning up.
absolutely,
So it's important to build it.
absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Let's give them a big hand. And our time on target is pretty close by law school standards, so thank you very much. And tomorrow, you'll see the conference. Hope to see you all there. And